Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild one-shot adventure, The Bone Dancer, Waterdeep Shadow Heist number 2, designed by Christian Eichhorn for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, and Charles. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos David Vicente Gilberto, Sean aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Alkshi, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. So Shadow Heist is a series of heists designed by Christian Eichhorn for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, because they all take place around Waterdeep, and as I mentioned in the review video for the first one-shot adventure, The Great Worm Theft, there's a lot of fill-in-the-blank room for some proper heists, because Dragon Heist doesn't really have a proper heist adventure, so I'm really down for adding these into Dragon Heist, but even if you're not running Dragon Heist, just good urban adventures, particularly for players who are into working for a Thieves Guild, for example, and have those kind of fun skills that can be put to great use here. The Bone Dancer kind of suffers from a lot of the complaints and flaws that I had in the first adventure, but also I think improves in at least one very important way. Unfortunately, does not have a level range. It's one of the things that really bugs me here. And I get that if you don't have a lot of combat, you're probably not going to have a lot of... you don't need maybe that firm level range as much, but you're still using skill checks. You're still having like CR ratings for other players on the board. There should be at least some kind of vague level range provided, and that really kind of bugs me that there's not one here. And based on what I read, it sounds like it's more closer to Tier 2, whereas I think the Great Worm Theft number 1 would have been closer to Tier 1. So I don't know if they're supposed to be played maybe in this specific order for different tiers of play or what. It even mentions in the foreword that basically you can choose to do them with whatever level of group you want, but I would offer some suggestions that, you know, be wary of that, because a lot of spells can break whatever heist you're trying to put into play here. This one at least does have some more interesting characters than the first one, although there are less characters in general. The character's goal is to steal some correspondence from a noble called Borgo Schaller, although who Borgo Schaller is a fun twist that makes this entire adventure a little more interesting than the first one. And I'm going to be comparing these a lot because it's, you know, the same author and it's the same style, and they're literally written in the same series. Waterdeep Shadow Heist number 1, number 2, and I believe there's a third one I'll be reviewing next. So you're going to get a lot of comparisons there. So if you haven't watched that review video, I would recommend watching that one, and then also this one. Watch all my videos though, it's great content. Borgo is a bone dancer in disguise. Now when I think bone dancer, that sounds like a porno to me, but apparently a bone dancer is a monstrosity that is a weird magic kind of skeleton thing that can wear flesh suits as like we wear clothes. So it kind of takes the form of whatever person it kills, and it can literally just step into and out of bodies, which is kind of terrifying when you think about it. But in this case, it's just treated as stat block a Warlock of the Fiend. So the actual Bone Dancer, I guess, we never get to meet, but Borgo is secretly a sentient skeleton walking around with a meat puppet thing, but the plans aren't really overly sinister. Like, they might as well be just Borgo Schaller, because his goal is to create what sounds like an organized crime front between himself and Baldur's Gate and Waterdeep in order to kind of blockade and run trade routes using, like, mercenaries and pirates and things. So, and I say mundane, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I get, you know, I think it'd be really fun. You can do like a crime thing in Waterdeep. That's interesting. But I feel like having this be this creepy, like, skeleton thing that wears suits is a little bit wasted here in the narrative. There's just no real trick with that. It might as well just be any warlock. In other words, if you're using the Warlock of the Fiend, and he's got a familiar quasit. The only thing that makes this a little bit more unique is that when the players are stealing the correspondence that they need to steal from his room, they can find those skin suits, and that's obviously damning evidence that Borgo is not really Borgo, and that can be a big plus for the adventurers to be able to prove that, which I believe that's included in the optional secret objectives, which is the same as, again, the Great Worm Theft did this, where there's a main objective. There are bonus objectives, which the players know about and say, hey, if you can also get this done, then we'll give you extra rewards. And then there are secret objectives where the players don't know about that they need to do, but if they manage to find certain things, then hopefully they can pick up on the fact that, hey, this will be useful for us to turn in for an additional quest reward. And one of the things is to find one of Borgo's flesh suits, which is fantastic. The heist takes place in an inn this time, the Boar's Head Inn in Waterdeep. And it's not terribly interesting. Part 2, I believe, because part 1 is the mission and the adventure background. They just meet with their Thieves Guild correspondents and get told that this Borgo person is in town. There's another agent from Baldur's Gate, like part of their secret police, that is tailing them and following him. And that's kind of an interesting monkey wrench. The players have to choose: do they want to involve themselves with her, or do they want to confront her, or maybe try and fight her or knock her out, or maybe gain her as an ally, or just try to avoid her. I think that's an interesting kind of additional player on the field. Otherwise, it's basically just these 3 NPCs. You got Borgo. Josephine is the person he's meeting with, who's his co-conspirator in Waterdeep, I suppose. And then Carlotta is the agent. And then there's the innkeeper, and then I believe a bouncer. The only other NPCs, which is a little disappointing because the first adventure did a good job of having a shit ton of NPCs. Granted, most of them were just single-sentence things, but there was a bunch of nobles showing up to this party, and you could tell it was a fun chance for more charismatic, focused party player characters to go through and hobnob with people and just have a little bit of fun of role-playing. This one has a little bit less of that, but the nice thing is the characters that are there seem interesting enough to interact with, which is cool. Part 2 is the actual inn. And this is, again, where it has kind of the same flaws as the first adventure in that it's just not a very interesting area. Like, it's just, again, this is Dungeons & Dragons. There's so many cool things you can do, and there's not a whole lot of cool things here. It really is kind of a mundane inn without much going on. Schuylers Room has a neat little twist in it in that his chest that the party has to break into is trapped with a gas trap. With a DC 18 con saving throw, and if you fail it, you fall unconscious. And unless you've opened the window beforehand, it's possible all the characters could fall unconscious. And then there's a nearby familiar, a quasit belonging to Borgo Schaller, named Mucky Pup, who will then tie up the characters, and he can telepathically communicate with his master. So unless the players do things very carefully, there's a good chance this will end up in a very sticky situation where they have to confront this CR7 Warlock of the Fiend, who will either try to pass this off as just they are thieves, guards, arrest them, or if the players manage to find the skin suits, then we'll obviously need to kill the players to keep that a secret. So I think that automatically makes things a lot more interesting than the first one, just the fact that Schaller is more than what he seems. I also like the way that the actual chest and investigation around the chest is built. In other words, the characters can roll an investigation check, and then they can learn different pieces of information depending on how well they roll. And I really always love to see that on information-based skill checks is, well, if you roll this, you get this much information. If you roll this, you get this much information. And have them be cumulative so you can kind of learn. At the very basic, you learn that the trap will be triggered, and then you can learn. Actually, if you roll really badly, you actually trigger the trap. But the chest is trapped, and then you can learn that it's what kind of a trap it is, and then how to disarm the trap, and then you disarm the trap. Depending on how well you roll, and I really like to see that. I also like to see that there's kind of a second chance here, where if you roll a thieves check to disarm the trap, which is a really, really difficult check. You only disarm it if you roll a 25 or higher, which is very difficult. However, you don't necessarily trigger it unless you fail with a below 5 roll. So if you do a 5 to 10, you blunder, and you know that any additional attempt will trigger the trap. So it gives you a safety net, which I like. As a DM that worries about, punishing the players too hard for trying something and just having the dice not go their way, I like that attempt. It's okay, you prick something and it's right there, and you just back up, or you hold your breath, and it's not going to trigger, but one more attempt will trigger it. So I do appreciate that built into it. And same thing, if you roll an 11 or above, you can actually repeat your attempts. but it takes more time, and time is kind of against you because there is a timeline of events, which is detailed in part 3, which was one of my positives for the last adventure, and it's a positive for this adventure. I like the way that it's built, that the DM can kind of keep track of the events, and there are things happening that players can take advantage of. Now, the timeline is not as interesting as the first one, which seemed to have more events happening. This one is really just the players arrive. There's an arm wrestling tournament, which can be fun for some characters with the bouncer Blood Tusk, I believe the half orc. They can bet on that. There's the agent is disguised as the bard in the room. At some point, just the Josephine arrives to talk with Borgo. They retire to his chambers. They, he gives the correspondence letters or whatever, and then she leaves, and then he basically retires for the evening and goes to sleep, wakes up next day, and then goes. That's basically all that happens. It's really kind of disappointing compared to the timeline in the first event, which had a duel and a private dancing performance and all these different things that players could interact with and take to their advantage. This one was much more, it feels more straightforward, and it's a smaller zone, even though I think the mark that they have to go after, which is the Bone Dancer in disguise, is more interesting. So it's kind of a give and take thing. What really makes this, cements this, however, as I do think the overall better heist, is that we do get the NPCs' reactions to what the PCs are doing, and they seem a lot more satisfying than in the first one. So, for example, the fact that the warlock, the Bone Dancer, has a familiar that can warn his master if somebody tries to fuck with his chest, or he just sees the PCs kind of enter in there or start trying to open that chest. And then Borgo can come in, and as I mentioned earlier, he will either bring down the guards on them or just attack them, depending on what the players know, which is cool. There's a whole monkey wrench with the agent, Carlotta, that determines how much is she paying attention, and if she hears a noise, and she'll go in and investigate. And then now they've got an agent for Baldur's Gate that's not an evil person but has her own agenda. So those are very interesting things, and makes this whole thing a lot more interesting to run and play than the first adventure, even though the actual timeline of events is disappointingly bare. And unfortunately, it still suffers from the same really bare bones maps, which I'm really, really not a fan of. I mean, I'm glad, I guess, we got maps at all, and these are given as separate player maps, but I'm never going to use these. Like, as somebody who, again, I primarily play on Roll20, so virtual tabletops, and having nice maps are not just nice to have, they're necessary to have. These I would not actually play on and use. It's, you get some visualization, but it's not that necessary. And I mean, an inn is thankfully not that hard of a thing to put together, and it's a pretty small map, so it wouldn't be that difficult to throw a map together. But I don't like, it's a con for me. I just don't like these maps at all. I don't like the style. It's not something that I would actually want to utilize. But overall, it still suffers from some of the same flaws of the first adventure. I think it's better in some ways and worse in some ways, but overall I would probably put it slightly above the first one. Let's go over my pros and cons for the Bone Dancer Shadow Heist number 2. Alright, so pro, it's the enjoyable dime novel design featuring weathered pages and painted character portraits. And I did literally copy and paste that from the first one because it's structured, visually presented the exact same way, and I do like that structure. You can see there was about a lot of painted character portrait art, and I like that kind of front cover. I just like the visual design of this whole thing, like that dime store novel, pulpy novel adventure. I think that's a really cool design. You do get the timeline of events, which span the time that Borgo Schuylers is at the inn. Timeline, the events are not quite as interesting, but I still appreciate having that timeline there. Pro, the NPC reactions and consequences for how and when the PCs tackle the events. Very, very important. That basically makes this a lot better and a more well-written heist to me, is that there are proper consequences and kind of what-ifs to how the PCs handle the situation. Cons, pretty much the same as the first one. Bare bones, unattractive maps. Just do not like the map designs at all. And no level ranges are provided, which I find very, very annoying because it's difficult to scale, whether things. I get that it's up to the DM to be the final arbiter of the challenge level, but at least give me a ballpark estimate. Final verdict: it suffers from the same flaws as the first heist, but the Bone Dancer features a more interesting victim to steal from, as well as proper reactions and consequences from the NPCs. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.